Imagine an isolated continent, a natural laboratory where evolution followed its own rules. Now wipe away the sunny image of modern Australia with its kangaroos and cuddly koalas. Because millions of years ago, that very land was a true hell on earth. Do you dare to journey back to an Australia ruled by giant beasts, ferocious predators, and reptilian nightmares? In this episode, we'll take you to a time so brutal, no human could have survived more than a single day. We're talking about an age when predators stretched over 7 meters long, and flightless birds could sprint faster than 50 kilometers per hour, charging like raging bulls. This is no ordinary documentary. This is a story of survival, of evolution, and of extinction. Welcome to prehistoric Australia, a continent born of nightmares. To understand the madness that was prehistoric Australia, you have to go back a lot. Not a few thousand, but millions of years back. During the Pleistocene, between 2.6 million and 10,000 years ago, Australia was already a continent separate from the rest of the world. While North America faced ice ages and Europe saw mammoths walking among Neanderthals, Australia was creating its own bestiary. And boy, was it strange. Isolated by oceans for more than 40 million years, Australia was an evolutionary capsule. While in other parts of the world placental mammals dominated, here the marsupials, creatures that carry their young in pouches and became the kings of the local food chain. But this was not the hot, dry ecosystem that many associate with Australia. Today, the continent had dense forests, open savanna, meandering rivers and mega-wetland areas, especially in the north. The humidity allowed the proliferation of enormous species, and when the climate became drier in the center, the creatures adapted, becoming larger, tougher, and deadlier. But the key to understanding this apocalyptic scenario is time. Over millions of years, without external competition, Australian creatures evolved into forms gigantic in a phenomenon known as island gigantism. The result? A fauna straight out of a horror movie. Carnivorous marsupials the size of lions, flightless birds with beaks capable of breaking bones, snakes that exceeded 5 meters, and turtles as big as small cars. The flora was also different. Many plants that are common today were absent, and in their place grew forests of casuarinas, primitive trees and giant ferns, vestiges of even older eras. It was a landscape that smelled of humidity, where the crack of a branch could be the sign that something immense and hungry was approaching. Furthermore, the weather was not stable. It oscillated between wet periods and prolonged droughts, causing massive migrations of fauna and drastic changes in the landscape. These cycles forced animals to adapt to an unpredictable world. Being fast or strong was not enough. You had to be resistant, cunning, and brutally efficient to survive. Another terrifying detail: Australia had few large carnivores compared to other continents, which allowed some herbivorous species to also grow disproportionately. And when there are giant prey, sooner or later, the super predators. And in Australia, not only did they appear, dominate. In this scenario, our story is born. A hot, wild continent, full of contrasts. At every step, something hides in the undergrowth, something that breathes slowly, something that listens, something that he sees you before you see him. Here, in this land forgotten by time, evolution became dangerous. Welcome to the wildest natural laboratory on the planet, prehistoric Australia. Australia's prehistoric fauna wasn't just strange, it was terrifying. Imagine walking through a semi-forested plain, feeling how the earth vibrates under your feet. What looks like a small mountain in the distance moves. It's not a rock, it's a turtle. And not just anyone, it is the Melania, a 3-meter-long land turtle with a shell reinforced like a tank and horns growing out of its skull like a fossil demon. But let's start with the real giants. In the heart of the continent lived a colossal herbivore, the Diprotodon, the largest marsupial that ever existed. Imagine a wombat the size of a rhinoceros, with massive tusks and a jaw so powerful it could crush entire branches. He moved slowly, heavy as if he knew that few would dare attack him. But there was someone who would. That someone was him, Thylacoleo carnifex, also called the marsupial lion, Although the size of a modern leopard, its bite was proportionally more powerful than that of any other carnivorous mammal. This solitary or paired predator, scientists still debate its social behavior, possessed retractable claws, an unusual trait among marsupials, and butcher teeth capable of cutting bone with surgical ease. It was a silent killer, hidden among the trees waiting for the right moment to pounce. Beyond the forests, on the plains and savannas, even more bizarre creatures reigned. The Australian terror birds, known as Dromonithidae, were among the most imposing. The most famous species, the George Newton, measured more than 2 meters and weighed about 250 kilos. Incapable of flight, it compensated with robust legs and a sharp beak with which it could attack small prey or defend itself against predators with surprising violence. Imagine a mix between an armored ostrich and a dinosaur. That was Genyornis. And speaking of dinosaurs, although already extinct for tens of millions of years, the legacy of their forms still lived on in Australian reptiles. One of the most impressive was the Megalania, a giant lizard more than 5 meters long, a distant cousin of the current Komodo dragon. This beast, probably poisonous, could ambush its victims, bite them, and then patiently follow them while the poison took effect. Death came not quickly but with agony. In the skies, although less spectacular, giant bats and birds of prey controlled from above. But another nightmare lurked in the rivers and lakes. The quincana, a terrestrial crocodile measuring more than 6 meters, which was not limited to water like its modern cousins. This monster walked with its legs under its body, not sideways like current crocodiles, which gave it speed on dry land. He didn't need water to kill, and among all these colossi, there were also smaller creatures, but just as surprising. Gliding marsupials, venomous platypus-like monotremes, and carnivorous mammals that looked like they were designed by a science fiction artist. Each species had evolved to survive in an extreme ecosystem, without external predators, without continental competition, in a land that rewarded evolutionary innovation with blood. These creatures lived together in a delicate balance, hunting, migrating, reproducing in cycles dictated by climate changes. There were no humans yet in this landscape, no spear, no human footprints, for now. Just brutal, wild, primitive nature. The nightmare had a face, and claws, and fangs. In a world as ruthless as prehistoric Australia, survival was not a matter of brute force alone. Each creature, from the most fearsome predator to the humblest herbivore, had to master a set of lethal or brilliant strategies to stay alive. Time was not forgiving. Evolution had no mercy. Take as an example the Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion. It wasn't the biggest nor the fastest, but it was one of the most efficient. Its strength lay in precision and stealth. With retractable claws, a rarity among marsupials, it climbed trees silently, stalking from above like a specter. Its jaw, although shorter than that of other predators, could apply devastating pressure thanks to its specialized teeth, which cut through flesh and bone with a single snap. A surprise attack was enough. A well-targeted bite to the neck, and it was all over in seconds. In contrast, the Diprotodon, although herbivorous, was not easy prey. Its size and weight served as the first line of defense, but his real strategy was collective surveillance. They lived in groups, and at the slightest strange noise, the stampede was immediate. Strength in numbers, a common behavior today in elephants or buffalo, was also present here. If a Thylacoleo wanted to try, it had better attack the youngest or sickest individual, because facing an adult could mean certain death. And then there was the Megalania, which did not need speed or ambushes. His main weapon was poison. With a single bite, he injected toxins capable of causing paralysis, internal bleeding, and disorientation. The prey could escape, but only for a time. The Megalania simply followed her calmly until she found her weak or dead. It is the strategy of the patient hunter, who knows that time is on his side. The quincana, those terrestrial crocodiles, perfected a combination of power and agility. Unlike modern crocodiles, they walked upright, which gave them an advantage. On firm ground were ambush hunters. They stood motionless in the bushes, waiting for a more trusting creature, like a giant kangaroo or a lazy marsupial, to pass by. Then, with a speed impossible for their size, they jumped to the attack. His jaw not only caught, crushed, but it wasn't all strength or poison. Some survived thanks to deception and adaptation. The giant echidna, for example, although harmless, had sharp spines and a low body that made it difficult for any predator to flip it over. His best weapon was his form, like an armored hedgehog, slow but protected. The Genyornis birds, although heavy, they used their size to intimidate. But its greatest advantage was straight-line speed and its territorial instinct. They were not fleeing. They attacked. When cornered, they charged with their entire bodies and struck with powerful legs capable of breaking ribs. Imagine facing a 2-meter bird that, instead of escaping, runs towards you furiously. There aren't many species that do that today. In the skies, giant bats hunted not only insects or fruits. Some, with an impressive wingspan, could hunt small terrestrial creatures by swooping down, almost silently, taking advantage of the darkness of the night to feed without competition. Every species, even the smallest, had learned to live in a closed system where every opportunity could be the last. Climate changes, dry seasons, prey migrations, everything influenced the decisions of each animal, and when a resource was scarce, competition intensified to the extreme. Some creatures developed nocturnal habits to avoid the hunters of the day. Others migrated according to the rains, following routes known only by genetic memory passed down through generations. Others, more radical, hibernated, disappearing for months until the weather improved. The law of this world was simple: adapt or die. There were no exceptions. Prehistoric Australia had no room for error, and yet even with these strategies something was coming. Something for which no creature, no matter how strong or ingenious, was prepared. A silent enemy, relentless, that would change the course of history forever. The enemy had 2 legs: fire and hunger. For millions of years, nature had been the only force capable of changing the fate of Australia's megafauna. Monsoon rains, brutal droughts, natural fires caused by lightning, it was all part of the cycle. But towards the end of the Pleistocene, something began to change. The balance was broken, and the consequences would be devastating. First came the global climate changes. Around 50,000 years ago, the planet entered a phase of intense climate oscillation. In Australia, this meant a gradual but relentless transition towards drier and colder conditions. Wetlands shrank, rivers disappeared, and dense forests gave way to extensive arid areas. Animals that depended on humid vegetation, such as Diprotodon, were beginning to have difficulty feeding. The seasons were becoming more extreme. The rains came late or not at all. The vegetation changed, and with it, the entire ecosystem. Many marsupials, adapted to more leafy environments, saw their territories fragment. The great beasts that once roamed free across vast landscapes were now trapped between dry patches, forced to compete for dwindling resources. This new climate favored smaller, more versatile animals. Large creatures, no matter how adapted they were, could not reproduce as quickly or move as nimbly. Its extinction was not immediate, but it was progressive, a slow march towards oblivion. And then, the human being arrived. The first Homo sapiens are believed to have arrived in Australia between 65,000 and 50,000 years ago, probably crossing from Southeast Asia via islands and primitive rafts. These first settlers were hunter-gatherers who not only brought tools, but something even more revolutionary: the controlled fire. For humans, fire was a tool, weapon, and symbol of power. They used it to clear forests, guide animals to natural traps, or create more efficient hunting corridors. This behavior, called fire stick farming, radically transformed the landscape. Prescribed burns, although useful to humans, caused more frequent and intense fires, eliminating entire habitats. What was a brilliant strategy for them was a cataclysm for the megafauna. Larger animals, which depended on stable ecosystems, had no way to adapt to these sudden changes. Furthermore, for the first time in millions of years, they faced a new, intelligent, strategic, and collective predator. The Thylacoleo had reigned as a solitary hunter, but humans hunted in groups, with spears, fire, and traps. They They learned. They planned. They didn't need brute force, they needed patience and cooperation. The fossil remains show a disturbing pattern. Shortly after the arrival of humans, larger species begin to disappear. In a matter of a few thousand years, the blink of an eye in geological terms, near the 90% of Australian megafauna became extinct. Diprotodon. Out. Genyornis. Out. Megalania. Out. Quincana. Out. Was it the weather? Was it humans? Science still debates whether it was a combination of both factors. The truth is that environmental pressures and the arrival of humans created a perfect storm, one that none of those creatures, no matter how adapted they were, could survive. Some theories even hold that humans not only altered the landscape, but also they hunted selectively, eliminating the largest species first, both for the amount of meat and for prestige between groups. And when the giants fell, ecosystems collapsed like dominoes. Food chains were broken. Without large herbivores to keep the vegetation in check, the fires became even more destructive. Without giant predators, some smaller species proliferated uncontrollably, until they too fell. The era of the Australian titans was over, but here's still a piece missing in this puzzle. How exactly did they disappear? What clues lie beneath the dry red earth of Australia? And even more, what can we learn from this ecological collapse that could reflect our own future? The decline of Australia's megafauna was not a singular event, but a slow symphony of disappearances. There was no meteorite, there was no catastrophic eruption, but there were signs, traces, empty, and a disturbing truth, the most extraordinary. Creatures on this continent were silently disappearing one by one. Imagine for a moment the last George Newton, that giant bird unable to fly, alone, looking for a nest that no longer exists, in a landscape charred by fires caused by man. Without a partner, without shelter, without a future. Fossils of their charred eggs have been found, marking not only their presence, but their end. It is thought that the first humans perhaps fed on their eggs, a strategy that, repeated enough, ends any species. The extinction was not uniform. In some places, certain species resisted longer. In natural refuges, canyons, remote wetlands, it is possible that some diprotodons survived for centuries after their cousins disappeared in other regions. But it was an unequal fight. Each dry season was more severe. Each fire destroyed more. And the humans kept multiplying, exploring, hunting. They became part of the landscape, a force more powerful than any predator of the past. Fossils tell the story. Sites like Cuddy Springs reveal overlapping layers of human tools, and megafauna remains. Did they coexist? Yes, but briefly. And during that time, the balance was broken. Rock art. In some areas, it shows figures that could represent megafauna. Giant birds, colossal kangaroos, even reptilian forms that some link to megalania. But these drawings are also farewells, epitaphs painted with ochre. Study after study reveals the same pattern. Every time humans arrived on a new continent, the megafauna disappeared in a few millennia. In America, in Madagascar, in New Zealand. But in Australia, where there were no large glaciers or colossal tsunamis in that period, the correlation between human arrival and the disappearance of the giants is even stronger. Some species, such as Thylacoleo, could have become extinct due to a combination of causes: competition with humans, loss of large prey, environmental changes. Others, like the megalania, perhaps they were direct victims of hunting or the destruction of their habitats. Be that as it may, the result was the same. The thrones were empty, ecosystems changed forever, and it wasn't just the greats who disappeared. Parasites also fell with them, plants that depended on their dispersal, birds that followed their migrations, and small scavengers. It was a chain extinction, a silent, devastating, irreversible domino effect. What was left was a transformed landscape. Without giant herbivores to keep the vegetation in check, the undergrowth became denser, fueling fiercer fires. Without predators to control populations, some species proliferated excessively, further altering the environment. A new Australia was formed, drier, harsher, emptier. And although some species managed to survive, such as modern kangaroos and wombats, distant descendants of those titans, the world was no longer the same. The era of living nightmares was over. Today, scientists dig through the dust of time, searching for clues, piecing together fragments, bones, fossilized footprints, stone tools. Each discovery throws a new question into the void. Could it have been avoided? Could it be repeated? In many ways, it is already repeating itself. We live in a new era of massive loss. Every day, species disappear from the planet without anyone noticing their absence. And if the history of prehistoric Australia teaches us anything, it is that even the greatest, the most powerful, the most adapted, can fall. You just need the right enemy or the right change, and now that enemy is us. The story of prehistoric Australia is not just a tale of colossal creatures or lost landscapes. It's a mirror, an echo of the present. Those titans did not disappear overnight. It was a slow process, with signs that no one saw or that were ignored. Changes in climate, alteration of habitat, excessive exploitation of resources. Sounds familiar, right? Today we face a new mass extinction, this time global. But unlike the past, we now have the knowledge, technology, and awareness to act. The question is, will we do it in time? Because if the fall of the Australian giants taught us anything, it's that it doesn't matter how strong, fast, or imposing you are. If the world changes too quickly and you don't do anything, extinction always wins.